Throughout history, the same professions have adapted and evolved with the times, whether they are butchers, doctors, hunters, or farmers. But in every society and in every different era, there are professions so unique that they are marked in history books and leave a mark on modern society. For Korea, one of these would be that of the gisaeng. Prominent in society during Goryeo and even more so in the Joseon Dynasty, they are marked by their status as falling between the lowest caste of society's outcasts and that of prestigious artists. As the definition of polar opposites, how is that even possible? Well, today, let's answer the question of, who were the gisaeng? Entertainers or prisoners of society? The Korean gisaeng is one of the most complex professions to explain with modern-day sensibilities. Also known as ginya, they were women typically from outcasted, enslaved, or low-caste families, also known as the chunmin, that essentially provided entertainment and conversation with men of the higher castes like nobles, officials, and even royalty. By nature, gisaeng were regulated, monitored, and controlled by the state, and were somewhat comparable to conscripted slaves that could only be freed by a hefty sum paid to the government. This was also a cycle that continued throughout history, as the chunmin class was hereditary and a gisaeng's daughter would also be considered a gisaeng. Even while using such terminology, by nature they were far more complex than just a slave. Despite being the equivalent to many other lower-level professions at the time, gisaeng were required to be highly educated, highly cultured, and incredibly smart. As they were rubbing shoulders with the most elite of the elite, they were required to learn music, poetry, dance, calligraphy, etiquette, and speech as to please their patrons. In fact, despite their social status, many top gisaeng were considered to be the most educated women in the whole of Korea. Many were registered as children, and training started as early as 8 to 12 years old in specialized schools known as gyobang, which were run by the state. Despite what modern people may think, for many it provided a stable lifestyle from the harsh realities of living in crippling poverty during these times. It took many years to master the arts that they studied and trained in, and they typically began working as a full-fledged gisaeng around the age of 15. Expected to perform at a professional level immediately, they were dispatched to government banquets, official ceremonies, diplomatic events, and in more intimate environments with the elite or yangban class. On these occasions, they would perform a variety of mastered art forms and be female companionship who would partake in educated and elegant conversation. While not officially part of the job description, many gisaeng also partook in sexual relations depending on the relationship with the patron and what benefits they could receive from doing so. Because of their education and elegance, many viewed them as floating between classes with the body of the lower class and the mind of an aristocrat, a title fitting the profession. The gisaeng were most widely found in places where the government had a large presence. By far, the most prestigious gisaeng were located in the capital Hanseong, in present-day Seoul, but they were located in many other areas including Pyongyang, Kaesong, the former capital of Goryeo, Jeonju, Jinju, as well as the port cities of Busan and Wonsan. By nature, they followed the economic hubs, administration, and areas of wealthy cultural influence. Despite all gisaeng being part of the lowest rungs of society, even within their ranks there was a class system in place during the mid to late Joseon Dynasty. The highest rank, or irpe, took clients by choice and only served the most elite people as the face of high culture. The irpe hengsu, or leader of the gisaeng in each district, took on the duty of discipline and the training of new members. After this was the ipe, who took on mid-level clients and events and formed the vast majority of the gisaeng population. After this was the sampe, who took on commercial entertainment, lower-level clients, and at times prostitution. It is because of them that the gisaeng profession as a whole is misunderstood today. All classes, however, were strictly controlled and regulated, and were prohibited from many aspects of society. They could not leave the profession on their own will, nor choose their career path. Many could not choose assignments or clients, and magistrates decided where and when they would work as well as who they would perform for. They were, however, able to build relationships with their clients and could often accrue great wealth and prestige in the community through their relationships, and in some cases, even had their freedom bought out and even became concubines to the elite, though this was very rare. They were a constant presence throughout Goryeo and Joseon, but big changes were coming as international influence began affecting Joseon and the dynasty began to crumble. The later period of the Joseon dynasty began to influence the Gisaeng greatly. A struggling economy meant that it was more difficult for the state to support the entire system, and they would less frequently attend official state events. The biggest change happened in 1895 during the Kabul reforms, where King Gojong officially eliminated the class structure to society. While the now free gisaeng were no longer required to work in this capacity, many continued to do so to make a living despite the lack of protection they once had. This changed even more as Japan started to assert its influence on Korea. In 1908, before the total annexation of Korea, Japanese influence created the Kisaeng Regulation Order, which essentially removed the gisaeng from the palace and replaced their administrators with the Japanese. This directly led to an even further collapse of their social status and were simply grouped together with prostitutes. The performances and services of the gisaeng became a sort of tourist attraction to many Japanese immediately before and after the annexation of Korea. The gisaeng did play a surprising role during the independence movement. Because their job was so social and they mingled with people of all social statuses, they were privy to much sensitive information. Throughout the history of Joseon and the Japanese colonial era, they often shared information that could help underground movements like that against Japan. Dozens of gisaeng took part in the efforts of the March 1st movement against Japan. The Japanese colonial era was the last time the true traditional gisaeng was actively present in Korean society. Following the liberation from Japan, Korea rapidly began to modernize and industrialize. This left professions like the gisaeng behind, as it was viewed more and more as a relic of another time. By the 1960s, classical entertainment like this was replaced with music, radio, and movies, pushing it even further from public memory. The traditional court-centered culture of the gisaeng was kept alive, however, as gwanbon, or traditional gisaeng schools, shifted from Joseon-era practices to those that kept the performance art alive and often taught by true traditional gisaeng. This translated to performing for elite members of modern Korean society and foreign businessmen, as opposed to nobles and royalty. The system of these gisaeng houses was severely tainted by allegations of bribery and corruption, with massive anti-corruption reforms in the 80s and 90s pushing the culture onto its last legs. The oldest traditional gisaeng house, Ojinam, was closed in 2010, and the culture of these houses is all but lost to history. Despite the traditional gisaeng being a memory, the art forms that the gisaeng performed are actively being kept alive and in some ways revived. The dance, music, and performance aspect of the profession is still being taught in an effort to preserve historical heritage. The explosion of interest in Korean culture around the world and its appearances in popular media only fuel this interest. These days, many people incorrectly find gisaeng to be comparable to the Japanese geisha. There are many differences between the two, with perhaps the biggest one being freedom. The geisha had autonomy with their profession while the gisaeng were managed by the state. They were not viewed as low-caste people, but rather as delicate artisans that worked in the private sector as opposed to government ones. To put it simply, they were both masters of art, conversation, and performance, but the gisaeng served the state, and the geisha served the market. The gisaeng remain a part of Korean history and culture that is certainly very difficult to understand. Being caught between social classes and forced to do as they were told, they no doubt led a difficult and controlled life. They were, however, an important subject of Korean history, whose art forms have managed to survive to the modern day. If you like this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe so you can see more videos just like this.